Hello, in this video I'm going to be looking at the tank stat changes in Reforged. This is something I'm fairly interested in, as of course you'll see from my channel, a lot of it is stats, looking at stats of tanks and all that. So I'm going to be going through the main changes to tanks in Reforged, and by the way, these are intentional, they are not bugs, which is why I'm covering them in this video. I'm not going to cover all the small minor stat changes which have happened, as they could still be changed due to the engine itself or due to other factors, and they are likely not intentional, but these ones which I'm going to mention in this video are definitely 100% intentional by Wargaming. So starting off with the high tiers, tier 9, the T3043 and the 59 pattern are tier 9 medium tanks now. They have increased by one tier and they have received buffs accordingly. Now remember, these buffs are untested, so they could very well still change in the future, but for the moment we can sort of see and get an idea for what these tanks will be like. So the T3043 has had a big hit point improvement from 1300 in tier 8 to 1680 base in tier 9. On top of this, it had its armor improved. So on the hull it went from 90 to 115, on the sides of the hull from 50 to 75, and on the rear from 45 to 55. So definitely nice armor improvements, considering before the T3043 could get HE'd by almost anything from its hull side. The turret has also improved 20mm on the turret front to 210. On the side and the rear they are still the same. So you can see the tank's armor has been improved for tier 9. Its hull still isn't strong, however its turret is still roughly the same level of effectiveness as it was in tier 8. Next, the biggest change you'll see is the DPM. So this tank in tier 8 has a 12.9 second reload, now it is 8.2, so it has almost 3000 DPM with 400 alpha. On top of this, it keeps its great aim time, the dispersion hasn't changed, the gun depression hasn't changed, and the penetration hasn't changed. So this is what I mean about it being untested. 175 in tier 9 is terrible. 270 is okay, it's perfectly usable. In fact, if you use calibrated shells, it goes up to quite a good 305. But of course, that standard pen is quite bad. Against bots, not too hard to, well, penetrate enemies, but against real players, if this tank does release in this state on Reforged, not going to be the best time using standard ammo. So hopefully this tank does get tested with these changes and they will increase its standard penetration. However, this tank does seem actually pretty good. In terms of how fun it is to play from tier 8, I would say it's gotten more fun to play just because it has really very good DPM. It's 0.4 of a second faster reload than the WZ120. Yes, its penetration is worse, but hey, you can try min-max and, well, use the equipment to change the stats of the vehicle. So pretty interesting change, T3043 in tier 9. I'll say, in terms of general balance, they haven't done a terrible job on that tank because while its penetration is low, it does have the DPM and alpha. Next, the 59 pattern, similar changes to the T3043. It's had a hit point increase from 1450 to 1650. Its hull armor has also increased 115 on the front of the hull from 100. The size went from 80 to 83, the rear from 45 to 58. So also armor increases for the 59 pattern on the hull at least. However, on the turret it hasn't changed, and the turret armor of this tank has gone from being really quite good in tier 8 to being very weak in tier 9. So we'll have to see if Wargaming leaves that as it is, because this tank kind of is known for having a good turret in tier 8. Maybe they want to change that with it being in tier 9. Something else they've changed, of course, is the reload, 4.5 second reload from 5.6. So its DPM has increased massively from 2400 to 3000. However, the damage has not increased, so it still does 225 on standard with 190 on heat, which is very low for a tier 9 tank, and frankly its DPM isn't enough to make up for this. Wargaming, I believe, would still need to buff its reload time or buff its damage to 240. Currently, this tank is underwhelming, and it's definitely a general nerf to the tank if you compare the tier 8 to the tier 9. But this tank now, very fast reload, good DPM, but it's lost its armor and it's lost sort of gun effectiveness. So next, I actually have to buy the next tank because I do not own it. This is the KV-13. It is going to be the end of the line for the Generation T-34 set. Just going to boost the set so I can unlock the tank itself. So you can see here, KV-13, tier 8 tank in Generation T-34, coming after the T-34-85 and T-43 to finish off the tech tree as sort of a mid-tier tank. Of course, it being back in the tech tree does mean I do have to upgrade the vehicle to be able to see its stats, but now it is fully upgraded, I can sort of show you what's changed on the KV-13. So for one, it's gone from, well, the history of the tank. It used to be a tech tree tank in tier 7, it became a collector tank, and now they've moved it back to being tech tree in tier 8. So tech tree tank tier 8, it has got a hit point increase from 1200 to 1400. Its armor has also increased from 95 on the front of the turret to 115 on the front of the turret. Other than this, its DPM has been nerfed because tier 7 is actually a higher DPM tier than tier 8. From 4.6 second reload to 4.8, 2632 DPM to 2520. I don't agree with this nerf. For how low alpha it is, this tank still does need to have that 2600 DPM. If you compare it to, for example, the Centurion 1, the Carnarvon, those tanks which also have or had low alpha, this tank's DPM is still just lacking, as a lot of tanks with 2500 DPM do just have a lot more alpha, for example 240 or 225, so 200 a little bit lacking in tier 8 for this level of reload. But they have also compensated the tank by giving it better penetration from 144 to 188 on armor piercing, 194 to 238 on APCR, and an extra 2mm on HE. Other than this, there aren't any other changes to the KV-13. It's basically still a sort of similar tank to the T-43, but up in tier 8. For this one, I would say, Wargaming, you definitely need to buff the alpha or the reload time while increasing its DPM. That 2500 with 200 alpha just isn't going to be good enough for tier 8, especially when this tank's armor hasn't really increased for tier 8 either. Only on the turret isn't really enough. Next, if I can remember right, the tanks in tier 7 have been changed. So the Fury is the first one. This tank moved from tier 6 to tier 7, which in my opinion actually a very good move. The reason being, in tier 6 there are just tons of Shermans, and they are all basically the same style of gameplay. So moving this to tier 7 is actually quite a good move. In tier 7 there aren't as many Sherman-like tanks really. There's only the T-23E3 and the Comet. So having it in tier 7, not the worst move. You'll also see here with the Sherman set, the reason they've changed it to tier 7 is because look at all these tier 6 Shermans. If we count the Firefly as well, which has also changed here, that would have been 5 Shermans in tier 6. So changing it to tier 7, not a bad move. What has actually changed on this tank? So of course tier 7, its reload has also gotten faster by a whole second from 4.6 to 3.6, DPM going from 2100 to 2660. Damage has not changed, Penetration though has been buffed from 128 to 152 on AP, from 177 to 203 on APCR, and from 20 to 38 on HE. So good penetration changes, and actually average for tier 7, so not bad at all in terms of penetration. Hull armor has also increased, but this doesn't make the biggest difference against most ammo. It's mainly to make it a little bit more HE resistant. So the front increases by 6mm, the sides are now, instead of 38, which is very easy to HE, they are 50, which is harder to HE, but still beware of big guns. And then the last thing, they have buffed the aim time from 2.7 to 2.6. No, they haven't changed the aim time at all, so the aim time remains the same. But the HP has also increased from 980 up to 1220. So this tank will actually be pretty good in tier 7. Maybe not the best, since it's sort of like the T23E3. It's got a niche of fast reload, and in this case 12 degrees of gun depression, so it does have a place in tier 7, and it will be pretty fun to play with such a fast reload and great gun depression. So moving Fury to tier 7, not a bad move in my opinion. Next, IV Sentinel. Actually, I'll skip the IV Sentinel for the moment, and I'll move to the Sherman Firefly, and you'll see the reason for that in a moment. But here we are with the Sherman Firefly. I do have to upgrade it so you can see the stats in their final state. So if I scroll down to find the Firefly, we can see its changes. Of course, this is now a tier 7 tank, not tier 6. It still remains in the tech tree with the Sherman set. Its reload time has decreased from 5 to 3.7, so fairly similar to the Fury. Next, the DPM has gone up from 1940 to 2570, so again, quite good DPM, fast reload for tier 7. Penetration has been nerfed on standard ammo, 171 to 160. The APCR penetration has been buffed though, sorry, no it hasn't, it stayed the same at 239. The HE penetration has been buffed from 20 to 35 to make that HE a little bit more usable, because 20 in tier 6 is useless, let alone in tier 7, so at least they have increased the HE usability. Armor, not changed much really, it's basically the same as before. The turret front became 5mm better, 6mm better, so not really too much change there. The hull front has also slightly become better, just to help it resist some more HE from the front and sides of the hull, but otherwise, general effectiveness, this tank is still fairly paper. Next, the terrain resistances of this tank have changed, so from 0.9, 1, 1.7 to 1, 1.2, 1.5. This is actually a nerf, so the tank does have slightly worse terrain performance. However, in exchange, it did get an engine power buff from 536 to 644 horsepower, allowing it to accelerate now at 19 horsepower per ton if you do have the same setup as the current Blitz. On top of this, also an HP increase from 960 to 1250. So again, they've moved the Sherman Firefly just so they can sort of round off the set to end at tier 7, which they're doing for a lot of the beginner player sets. This is actually the first set one of the first sets you'll unlock as a new player. So being able to grind from tier 4 up to tier 7 and getting a tier 7 as sort of your final tank reward is a pretty good move. It would be kind of annoying to go through 2 or 3 tier 6 Shermans and just end there. Next, the IV Sentinel. Filter by the Australian tag here, so we can see the IV Sentinel. So this tank is actually very interesting. It is the end of the new set Move Slow, Fire Fast, which is going from the Valentine to the Matilda to the AC1 Sentinel to the AC4 Sentinel. It is currently the first Australian sort of tech tree set, as both Sentinels have been moved to the tech tree. The AC1 from being a collector and the AC4 from being a premium. So these tanks are actually both grindable and upgradable. You would have seen me upgrade the tank just now. But AC4 Sentinel, it has moved from tier 6 to tier 7. It has moved from premium to tech tree. Its reload time has been buffed from 5.3 to 3.6. Its DPM has increased from 1,830 to 2,664. Its aim time has been buffed from 3.4 to 2.9. Its armor has also been slightly increased, just like the Firefly and the Fury, not by too much, but has gone from 50 to 70 on the turret front, but the hull front has been nerfed from 65 to 50. So armor decrease on the hull, but armor increase on the turret. It won't make the biggest difference, but you know, certain tanks will be able to HE the front of the hull and the side, and the turret might be a bit harder to penetrate for some tanks. Next, penetration also increased from 145 to 151 on armor piercing, from 202 to 205 on APCR, so not much change there, and the HE remains the same. The terrain resistances have changed in the same way as the Sherman Firefly, so 0.9, 1, 1.7, 2, 1, 1.2, 1.5, so slightly worse on the terrain resistance, but it doesn't matter because the tank has more engine power, going from 593 to 699 with the same setup as you would have had in current Blitz. HP has also increased to be actually one of the higher HP tanks in tier 7 for a medium, from 970 to 1300. So the Sentinel, just like the Fury, it's a good move moving it to tier 7, I believe. They haven't balanced it badly. In fact, I think this tank is very well balanced, sort of like a T23E3 or a Comet, but just with slightly different stats. And it's Australian, right? So a bunch of Australian players are going to be wanting to grind up this tech tree. It's a great move, in my opinion, to have this tank as researchable for, well, just a different nation. Definitely interesting move by Wargaming, and a good one. Next in tier 7 is the Churchill Mark VIII. This one is definitely an interesting one for them to have changed. So this tank is actually fairly new to Blitz. It's not been in the game for that many years, but they've already decided to move it up one tier to be a tier 7 tank. So this tank has had its tier changed, tier 6 to tier 7. First thing you'll notice, HP increased by 300 from 1200 to 1500. Pretty average for a tier 7 heavy tank, but definitely not bad. You can also see its armor has increased massively, from the front of the hull being 152 to being 205, which is a lot of armor. That's more than the Black Prince, that's more than the Tiger 1, that is more than the majority of tier 7 heavy tanks on the front of the hull. Of course, I can't see if the lower plate has changed, but I believe that would also be stronger. Turret front, similar change from 152 to 203. Again, very strong for a tier 7 heavy tank on the front of the turret. So definitely appropriate armor changes for the tank there. The hull sides haven't changed, they are the same. But very nice armor and HP buffs for the Churchill VIII, keeping it on roughly the same level of armor and HP in tier 7 as it was in tier 6. Next, the gun. This is pretty interesting. Reload time buff by 1.2 seconds, from 8.6 down to 7.4. So its increase the DPM does increase by quite a bit, 1,880 to 2,200 almost. So definitely quite nice DPM for tier 7, especially considering your alpha is 270, which is not bad. Penetration has gone up as well, from 155 on AP to 177, on heat by 10mm from 220 to 230, and HE by 3mm. You can see the shell velocity of this tank doesn't change, which is I really like, because the shell velocity is one of the funny things on this vehicle, and it's one of the sort of unique aspects that makes it kind of worth playing and a bit of a challenge sometimes. One final thing which a lot of players are going to love that has changed on this tank: top speed increase from 22 to 27. Combine this with equipment changes which let you go at 30 with increased top speed on the equipment and generally better acceleration rate for the engine changes in Reforged. This tank does just become so much more comfortable to play with that better top speed. It does just make it a lot more enjoyable to play, and at tier 7 I would say definitely a more fun tank than the version we currently have in tier 6. They have also increased the engine power from 460 to 494. Not a massive increase, but it is an increase. And I believe that is it for the tanks that have moved to tier 7. Next I'll do tier 6. So there are actually 2 tanks in tier 7 which I did forget to mention. They are American heavy tanks. So the first one I will talk about is the M6A2E1. Just like the Sentinels, this tank has been moved to the tech tree. So it is now a tier 7 tech tree tank, not a premium. In terms of its stats and everything, nothing has changed, so it still features the same characteristics as before. It just doesn't make credits, and it can be grinded from the Eagle Shield Division set, which is actually quite a good move, because this being a beginner set, they would want it to end at tier 7, so it going from the T1 to the M6, the M6A2E1 does make a lot of sense, and this tank really isn't that special, so it being in the tech tree is perfectly fine. Wargaming should compensate these tanks with gold, because they did mention in Ultratest 1 that the tanks that moved to the tech tree, like the VK3002M, that tier 6 Panther prototype, would be compensated with gold. So I'd expect the same thing for the M6A2E1 and the Sentinels. Next, the Pawlack Tank. This is another tank from tier 6 that has moved to tier 7. So this tank, let me just have a look at what has changed on it. So this tank moved from tier 6 to tier 7, of course. It has gotten a HP increase, of course, from 1200 to 1450, or 1508 with equipment. Its HP, well, its armor has also increased from 90 to 120 on the front of the hull, and it has also got side and rear hull armor increases, but with how this tank is shaped, not the biggest difference. The turret armor has also increased, but only on the sides and rear. The sides by 8mm and the rear from 45 to 57. The reload time of this tank has also gone down noticeably by 2.2 seconds, from 8.5 to 6.3, giving it a massive increase in DPM from 1691 to 2284. It keeps the same alpha damage, and its penetration also increases slightly, I believe. No, its penetration stays the same, 150, 182, 30. So again, changes are untested. This tank would need more penetration to fit in at tier 7, but that will probably be addressed in the future. And finally, the engine power has also increased from having 863 to 955 in the same setup as current Blitz, which is an increase of 14.5 to 16.1 horsepower per ton, which is actually very nice considering this tank has a very good top speed for a heavy tank. So Pawlack Tank, again, I think not bad changes, the direction they're going with this. I think this will be a pretty decent tank. More fun than it is currently in tier 6, but they do definitely need to improve the penetration of this tank. So that's it for tier 7. Actually, it for tier 7. Moving to tier 6, there are some tanks to be looking through. So the first tier 6 tank I'll be talking about is the Matilda Black Prince. So this tank has increased from tier 5 to tier 6, and in terms of its HP, it has gone up from 750 base to 950 base. On top of this, it has also received massive turret front armor buff from 93 to 150, which is actually very good. It will bounce all mediums, and even a lot of heavy tanks will have to load premium ammo just to ensure a penetration. The hull armor has also increased 78 to 135, again a massive increase, which is very good considering this tank before in tier 5 didn't have any armor, but now it actually has some armor in tier 6. On top of this, penetration also increased from 130 to 144 on AP, from 180 to 184 on APCR, and from 32 to 39 on HE. On top of this, it has also received damage buffs from 90 damage to 100 on AP, which does really help its DPM, and its reload time has also gone down from 2.9 to 2.7, so an overall DPM increase from 1,878 to 2,220, and also damage of APCR and HE has also increased. Other than this, there's no changes to the gun. Of course, this tank keeps its amazing frontal 12.5 degrees of gun depression, which is very nice, and mobility has also noticeably gotten better, from 342 to 485 engine power in the same setup, meaning an 11.4 horsepower per ton rate to 16.2, which is a massive increase. On top of this, top speed increases by 12 kilometers per hour to 37, and reverse speed by 5 kilometers per hour to 15. So Matilda Black Prince goes from being a rather sort of unique but not very good tier 5 tank to a very interesting and pretty good tier 6 medium tank, considering its mobility now is actually usable, though 40 is still not fast with the equipment, but it's actually usable. You can get the reload down to 2.5 seconds with Duncan, which is quite insane with 100 alpha damage, so this tank is actually pretty interesting and it's very fun to play. Of course, I've been playing against bots, but even against normal players, it will be quite interesting with such a quick reload and actually pretty good armor. But the next tank in tier 6 that has changed tiers is the VK3001H. This tank before was tier 5, a collector tank. It is now a tier 6 tech tree tank in the Sandspear Regiment set, along with the VK3001P. So I'm not sure what is going on here. To grind this set, you have to play through 2 different tier 6 medium tanks, well, 1 medium, 1 heavy. I'm not sure why you have to grind 2 tier 6 tanks, but you do, and the VK30 is the heavy after the VK3001P. So this tank, they've not done a great job at balancing this for tier 6. Its hit points have increased from 780 to 1180. Its reload time has decreased from 6.6 to 4.6, giving it an increase of, well, from 1460 to 2092 DPM. But other than this, nothing much has changed. Its penetration has gone up by 5mm to 16mm on its premium and standard ammo. Its top speed has increased by 2. Its engine power has increased very slightly from 440 to 470. But this tank has no armor for a heavy tank, and its engine power isn't good enough to allow it to really be a sort of mobile, faster heavy tank. So the problem with this is that it's going to be a heavy tank without any armor at all. Not really that great, but this tank will still be decent enough considering it has pretty good DPM, its penetration is okay, and overall still fairly usable, but I think they should be looking to buff its armor, especially as in this set, this one is supposed to be the quote-unquote heavy tank before the Tiger P, which is one of the best armored tier 7 heavies. But that is it for the VK3001H. Next, the AC1 Sentinel. Just like the AC4, this is becoming a tech tree tank. This one, though, is jumping up 2 tiers from tier 4 to tier 6. So, what has changed on this tank is that it has received a massive increase in HP from 600 to 980. Its armor has increased from 65, 50, 65 on the front of the hull, well, on the hull, to 113, 45, 49 on the hull. So its front has gotten better, its sides and rear have gotten weaker, but side and rear armor doesn't really matter all that much. So the turret has also increased from 50 on the front to 90 on the front, which is quite nice. It will help you to bounce some lower tier tanks, especially with that mantlet. But the sides have also increased from 35 to 55, and the rear has decreased from 65 to 48. The DPM, though, is where this tank gets interesting, because its reload time was decreased from 3.6 to 3, its alpha damage was increased from 75 to 110, of course for other ammo as well, which means its DPM went from 1250 in tier 4 to 2200 in tier 6, and that DPM even for tier 6 is actually very good. Of course its alpha is a bit low, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Penetration has also gone up 84 to 140 on AP, 121 to 185 on APCR, and 12 to 39 on HE. So this tank does actually have usable HE now, and its penetration for a tier 6 tank is perfectly average for a medium. On top of this, also engine power increases. Its top speed remains the same, but it does get faster at reaching it. So it goes from 12.9 horsepower per ton to 16.8, which is an over 100 horsepower increase for its engine. So this tank goes from being sort of a slow medium with good armor to now being a more mobile, fast-firing medium. Also, this tank still makes legendary credits, so that's probably going to be adjusted in the future, as it is a tech tree tank. So finally, moving down to tier 5, the last tier which has tank tier changes, and I'll be starting with the Valentine AT. This is the one tank out of all of them which Wargaming just seems to have not done. I have no idea what they're doing with this tank. So this tank has moved 2 tiers from tier 3 to tier 5. They've increased its HP by 10 for a 2-tier jump, so 490 to 500, jumping from tier 3 to tier 5, remember. Armor remains the same, DPM has been nerfed, its reload increases by 1.1 seconds from 3.6 to 4.7. Its alpha damage increases by 10 on both AP shells, but again, your reload was nerfed by 1.1 seconds, meaning your DPM goes from 1482 to 1283. A 200 DPM nerf for jumping up 2 tiers, remember? Next, penetration increases on AP, standard AP, by 2mm, and on premium AP is nerfed by 5mm down to 175. Top speed does increase noticeably from 24 to 37, but the engine power doesn't increase all that much. 2.2 horsepower per ton from 11.6 up to 13.8, so it's still not a fast tank. On top of this, it lacks gun depression, it lacks armor, it has horrible hit points, its DPM is low, its alpha is low. So Wargaming, what are you doing with the Valentine AT? This tank looks like it still has tier 3 stats. Maybe the tier jump was a mistake. Actually, yeah, it very well could have been a mistake to move its tier up from tier 3 to tier 5, since this tank really, it just doesn't have any stats that allow it to fit in tier 5. But yeah, that is it for the Valentine AT. The next tank to move tiers is the Matilda from tier 4 to tier 5. Again, another tank from this Australian tank tree set. This Matilda has been replaced by the Valentine Mark IX at tier 4, because remember, the tier 4 of the British medium heavy tree used to be the Matilda, but now the Matilda has been replaced with the Valentine. Matilda moves up to tier 5, and the Sentinels take tier 6 and 7 spots. So one of the new trees for the game, one of the new sets. The Matilda, in terms of its changes, it goes from tier 4 to tier 5. Its HP increases from 620 to 750. Its armor increases on the hull front from 75 to 92, so not great. It's probably not going to actually make that much of a difference in tier 5, but we'll have to see in actual performance. The turret armor has been nerfed from 95, 95, 95 on front, sides and rear to 90 at the front, 85 on the sides and 85 at the rear. Though maybe this is because the turret is the stock turret, at least in terms of the tank model. I'm not sure if they actually have messed up the turret on this tank, as they have already done that on quite a few tier 7 tanks. So it might be a case where the stock turret is shown as top and the numbers are incorrect. But of course that remains to be seen. Next, DPM has been increased from 1,424 to 1,748, so it is actually very nice DPM for a tier 5 heavy tank. Reload time has been buffed from 3.4 to 3.1, alpha damage has been buffed from 80 to 90 and from 70 to 80 on its premium, and its penetration has gone up from 89 to 110 on standard ammo. So pretty good gun for a tier 5 heavy tank. It will be shooting very fast and it has great DPM for a tier 5. On top of this, it also got an engine power buff from 341 to 368, and its top speed also increased. So it will be a bit faster, but still not a very quick heavy tank. In terms of, is it getting better tier for tier? I can't tell really, because this tank, one of the main things that it was known for was having very good armor, and that doesn't seem to have increased much at all for moving to tier 5, so we'll have to see. Now, the last tank changing tiers is the T6E1 Grizzly. This moved from tier 4 to tier 5. Its HP has increased to 700, which is a 100 increase. Its armor has slightly increased, just like all the other Shermans, mainly on the hull, not the turret. Its DPM has increased massively from 10.1 to 5, reload from 10.1 to 5.9, DPM from 894 to 1520, so for tier 5 actually, for a medium tank, that is actually quite good DPM. Its penetration has also gone up, 90 to 111 on standard ammo, and 125 to 150 on its premium. Top speed also increased from 42 to 45, and engine power has also increased, allowing it to now accelerate at 2 horsepower per ton better than before, which is 18.3. So actually, T6E1, quite good changes. This tank used to be very boring in tier 4, also tier 4 used to be just a dead tier. Hopefully it changes in Reforged, but this tank, very long reload for tier 4. It just didn't have too much going for it. Now it's actually got nice DPM for a tier 5 medium, and it will sort of play like just a faster reloading version of the Tech Tree M4 Sherman. So actually quite a good move to change this tank from tier 4 to 5 in my opinion. Not like there are lacking numbers of Shermans in tier 5, so not too sure the reason for the change, but I do like the change because it will make the tank a lot more interesting to play. So that is all the tank tier changes for the intentional changes in the game. I will now mention 2 unintentional changes, or what might be unintentional. One is the silencer. This tank has moved from tier 7 to tier 8 with no stat changes whatsoever. So it has the exact same stats it had at tier 7, but it's now a tier 8 tank. This might be intentional because the Silencer is a very strong, very good tier 7 tank, and moving it to tier 8 would sort of make sense as somewhat of a nerf, because just changing its tier and not changing its stats would do that. But I'm not 100% sure if it was intentional or if this is just a bug, because there were no stat changes at all. And also in tier 8 we already have the GSAW 1008, which is a 2-shell autoloader with 2.5 second injury clip, just like the Silencer, so we'll have to see about that. The other tank that changed tiers, which is most likely a bug, is the BZ-74-1, which this was a bug from Ultratest 1 where this showed as a tier 10 heavy tank, but it's actually tier 9. So I think this is still a bug they just haven't fixed yet. It does have different hull and turret armor stats, but I think again that's just a bug because they haven't actually properly implemented this tank yet. In fact, I'm not sure if you can actually play this tank in battle because I don't own it, but the BZ-74-1 most likely a bug. Silencer could be a nerf by changing tier. But now, finally, I'll get to the tier 10 tank changes. I have left this for last because these changes might just be bugs as well, because a lot of these changes that have happened are relating to the previous tier 10 rebalance that happened last year in 11.3. So I'm not sure if these are actually intentional or not. But firstly, the Leopard 1, this tank gets a DPM nerf from 3,814 down to 3,524, reload time from 5.7 to 6.1. Its top, forward and reverse speeds do both increase by 2 kilometers per hour each. Again, not too sure why the reload nerf, but it could just be a bug. However, also having such high DPM in Reforged when you can run Duncan as well might be a bit insane, so maybe it is an intentional change. Next, the Vickers Light tank has received a engine power nerf from, let me just see here, 1049 horsepower down to 932 horsepower, which decreases its power to weight ratio by 3. Not really the biggest nerf for this tank, especially as all tanks accelerate faster with the new Reforged physics, but that is a nerf for the Vickers Light. Next, the STB1 receives basically its old change before they nerfed it properly in 11.3, which is giving it better reload from 6.5 down to 6.3 and 3029 DPM to 3119. It also still has 300mm of premium AP penetration. Again, these are changes from 11.3 before they actually implemented it, so these could just be bugs. Next, right, the Foch 155. This tank, again, changes from 11.3. This tank has its old engine power of 1200 base, meaning it goes at 25 horsepower per ton in its acceleration, which is very high. Meanwhile, Wargaming hasn't actually reverted the armor on this tank, so the armor is still the same as the current version, which has very strong frontal armor. But it still has its old engine power, so again, it might be a bug. And finally, the last tier 10 that has changes is, Irish tanks in this game. The final tier 10 with changes is the Minotauro, and you'll see here its alpha damage is 470, not 490. Again, this is one of the changes that Wargaming was planning to do for 11.3, but it got cancelled, so this might be a bug. Keep that in mind. That's why I've left all these tier 10 tanks till the end, because all of the tier 10 changes might just be bugs from 11.3. So we'll have to see sort of if these do actually go into Reforged, but I wouldn't really be expecting them for tier 10 because it's likely we might get another tier 10 rebalance before Reforged anyway. So those are all the tank changes that have happened in Reforged. I have gone through every tank in tier 7 through 10 and checked all the ones that have changed tiers, so these are it basically. But yeah, thanks for watching that very long stat review for all the changes of the tanks in Reforged.